Hi guys, I'm Kristen and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a wrap up for the books that I read in March. However, I've decided to split it up into two videos for the sake of time. This one is going to be all of the fantasy books that I read, and the other one is going to be the romance books that I read, which will include fantasy romance. In the month of March, I also participated in the Animals, Companions, and Magical Creature Readathon hosted by Elliot Brooks. And so I thought I would do a really quick just like overview of my bingo card or my magic card for the readathon. I was successful and got bingo or magic. I did end up having to sort of pivot and go for a different line on the bingo card than I was planning on, and that is because I DNF'd one of the books that I was using for the Q disability, and that was Into the Drowning Deep. I just did not enjoy the writing style. I didn't really connect with any of the characters. Some of the messaging that the author was going for was a little bit heavy-handed, and overall I was at the 50% mark and just was not enjoying this book at all. So for my magic line, I used The Fires of Vengeance by Evan Winter for the Q's African inspired, and for Beyond because of the dragons, or sorry, because of the demons, but I also could have used this for adult as it's adult fantasy, and Sky because of the dragons. I used Rhapsodic by Laura Thalassa, which is a fantasy romance for the Beyond Q with the Fae from the other world. I used The Name of All Things for the adult Q, but I also could have used it for Sky because of the dragons and Beyond because of the demons. And then finally, I used Crown of Feathers by Nikki Palpredo for the Sky Q because of the phoenixes. Okay, so now for the wrap-up portion of the video. The first book that I read in March was The Crown of Feathers by Nikki Palpredo. This is the first book in a young adult fantasy series featuring Phoenix Riders. I loved this book so much. The second book that I read in March was the sequel, Heart of Flames. In the first book, we get three different POVs from Veronica, Tristan, and Sev, all three of whom are animages, which is the main magic component in this world. Essentially, animages can communicate and control animals, which is a requirement to become a Phoenix Rider. The story takes place about 16 years after there was sort of a revolution or like a civil war within the Empire, and this past war actually plays a significant role in each of the characters' lives and with the plot moving forward. The theme of this book, I would say, is really who do you want to be as a person? And it explores this using a couple different direct comparisons in a few different relationships and contrasting their moral and philosophical beliefs, and particularly the treatment of animals. This book had two really great hate to friend to love slow burn romances that progress over the course of the two books, one hetero and one LGBTQ romance. The next book that I read was This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El Matar and Max Gladstone. I listened to this as an audiobook on Scribd, and I would highly recommend. The two narrators do such a great job of bringing these characters to life. It is a sci-fi novella that follows two agents solely identified as Red and Blue, who are on opposing sides of this sort of futuristic war, who begin communicating through letters. It starts off as taunts as they try to sabotage each other's plans, and it slowly over time develops into so much more as they get to know each other through these letters. This was an unreal and delightful experience listening to this book. I skipped back and forth between binging it and trying to slowly meter it out because I wanted to make it last longer. The world building is vast, but not overly descriptive. You can't and don't need to understand everything that is happening within the world and the world building. I see it as sort of color commentary or a sort of very colorful, out of focus scenery in which the letters and this relationships take place. I don't think this book is going to be for everyone. If you are looking for a plot heavy, fast-paced, action-packed, or like plot-based book, this is not that. If you're okay with speculative lit, with a vague but colorful world-building background and are looking for a reading experience that is more than here's the plot, here's the story, and are looking to think about big questions in life and humanity, this might be worth it for you. I loved it. The next book that I read was We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faizal. I think this book suffered a little bit from expectation syndrome for me, and I think that was solely due to how long I had to wait to get a copy of this book from the library. It was over 4 months, and I think in my head, the longer that I had to wait, the more and more I built this book up as being amazing in my head. This is a debut novel in a young adult fantasy duology that is influenced by ancient Arabia. Zafira is known as the hunter. She's the only one who can hunt in this cursed forest, and so she does so in order to feed her people, all while hiding her gender. Nasir, on the other hand, is known as the Prince of Death because of his role as his father, the Sultan's assassin. Zafira and Nasir are both sent on a quest to find this lost artifact that will restore magic to the world. Oh, and Nasir has also been sent to kill Zafira. Ultimately, I just felt like the plot kind of meandered. It feels like there is unclear direction other than restore magic. You don't really know what the stakes are. There is a little bit of a found family component or like crew vibes, but I didn't really feel like there was enough time to fully develop that component. One of the characters has had a verbally abusive upbringing, and I did think that that was very well done. You could see how their history and trauma impacted this character's core beliefs about themselves, their automatic thoughts in situations, and how they viewed certain situations and took things in. Then I read The Name of All Things by Jen Lyons. This is the second book in the Chorus of Dragons series. I did talk a lot about this book in my first reading vlog, so if you'd like to see more in-depth thoughts about it, you can check that out. A Chorus of Dragons is an epic fantasy series. This book did pick up only a couple days after the ending of the first book, but then it sort of got stuck there because our main character, Kieran, meets a new character, and then the character spends 80% of the book telling Kieran their story. The ending of the book had a ton of action and drama, some great reveals, some surprises, and a rather disappointing reunion scene. So this book actually ends up finishing only a few days after the first book, but it felt like forever because we were essentially reliving the time period, not the same plot though, but just like reliving the time period that the first book was in. However, all of my favorite characters are now back in one place and time at the end of this book. So I'm really excited to see where the gang goes next and what happens in the next book. Bonus, there is some LGBTQ rep in the first book, although it wasn't a huge focus. But in the second book, there is the introduction of a character and a kingdom where they have some really interesting ideas and practices regarding gender. So that was a really cool component. Next up, I read The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson, which is the first book in the Remnant Chronicles. This is a young adult fantasy romance. It follows Princess Leia, who decides she does not want to go through with the political marriage, runs away, and in her new life meets two handsome strangers who are secretly the prince she left at the altar and the assassin that was sent to kill her. The way this book is written, you, the reader, and I mean, obviously Leah, don't know which one is which. There are chapters written solely from the prince's perspective and from the assassin's perspective. And then there are also chapters written from, like, or that are identified as the names that they have given to Leah. But the content that is included is such that you can't tell which one is which. I had so much fun guessing who was who throughout the book. I was so certain it was one or the other at various different points in the book. There are obviously some political ramifications of this failed marriage alliance, and so outside of the romance, that is where the plot goes. The next book that I finished, I actually have a copy of because I bought it, and that is Namesake by Adrienne Young. This is the second and final book in the Fable duology. This book featured the mystery of her mother a little bit more and got a lot more political in terms of the, they're not pirates, they're traders. And it went into sort of the politics behind the traders and the Traders Guild and the council that organizes that and all of that stuff. I felt like the mystery component wrapped up a lot more quickly than I was expecting. I thought that was sort of going to be the thing that this book was about. I did do a reading vlog while reading this book, so you can check that out as well if you'd like to see my thoughts. I did sort of a non-spoilery review at the beginning of the video and then a spoilery reaction vlog. When I finished Namesake, the next morning I was feeling very book hangovery, and so rather than reread Namesake again, I decided to reread Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. If you like political fantasy, you cannot not read this book. It is inspired by the Aeneid. I forget the other classic reference as well, but also the Russian Revolution. It takes place about 9 or 10 years after a revolution that tore down the nobles and placed a very early communist Russia vibe government in its place, the Republic. Oh, the Republic, that's the other classic reference. It is sort of an Anastasia retelling. It follows two main characters, Annie and Lee, who are training to become dragon riders. Annie and Lee have a very complicated dynamic. They are both orphans from the revolution, one of whom comes from a family of serfs whose family was killed by the dragon overlords, and one of them is secretly a child of one of those dragon overlords, who is more of sort of this Anastasia figure. Because they grow up in the orphanage together, they have a really close, tight friendship, but it is obviously complicated by who they are. This book really focuses on the political ramifications of a new government forming in a very short time after a revolution. It makes you question whether or not a new government can really be better than the old government. I cannot say enough good things about this book. If you haven't read this book, you should read it. It's amazing. And then finally, the last fantasy book that I read in March was The Fires of Vengeance by Evan Winter. This is the second book in the Burning trilogy or series. I'm not sure how many books it's expected to be. I did enjoy this book a lot more than I was expecting to. The book follows Tau in an African-inspired caste-based system. It is a very action and fighting battle-heavy book. The first book focuses mostly on Tau's military training. So it is very training heavy, and Tau's personality in the first book is very like, must get good at fighting in order to enact my revenge. The second book, Tau is finished his training and is now in a more political setting. There was still a lot of fighting and fight scenes, but there was a lot more political planning within sort of this civil war that is taking place. The focus in this book was a lot heavier on the caste system and prejudice and privilege, and I appreciated that Tau seemed to be connecting a little bit more with his sword brothers. Part of it feels like Tau just like is so focused on his revenge plan and what is immediately in front of him that he just, everything else is in the periphery and he cannot grasp or contain anything else that's happening around him. That does sort of start to shift a little bit in this book, and so I appreciated that. Anyway, that is my wrap up of all of the fantasy books that I read this month. Stay tuned for my wrap up for the contemporary and fantasy romance books that I read. I will see you next time. Bye guys.